Hello and welcome to No Gods, No Monsters, where in a slight change of pace, we're stepping away from Blades in the Dark for this week and jumping into a world of both gods and monsters as we delve into the very, very dark fantasy of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition by Cubicle 7 Publishing. Cubicle 7 released some supplementary material, a PDF called Adventures Afoot in the Reikland. Now, this PDF provides several different instances of plot hooks, very, very simple little setups that give you as a GM something to play with, something that you can go and, from those instigating moments, create adventures, create stories for your players to travel through, adventures for them to go on. And to anyone that has had a conversation with me for roughly more than about 8 minutes will have realised that I have an unwavering love of the shambling undead. And that is why for this one, we'll be looking at that personal favourite of mine, the humble zombie.
Dragons.
What?
It's Dragon Week, so do something about dragons.
No, I'm doing zombies. Dragons? No, I'm not doing dragons. Dragons are boring. What's new and novel about a dragon? Big, scaly lizards, they fly, they hoard gold. There is nothing you can say or do to make them interesting in any way, shape or form.
Jack? He's not coming back, is he?
Except maybe make them a zombie.
You could make it a zombie.
Let's do this. This setup, entitled Interview with a Dragon Slayer, focuses primarily on a mountain expedition. To give you the background and the brief that's provided within Adventure Afoot in the Reikland, Kalader the dragon hasn't been seen for generations, but that means nothing to Thogna Ingotfist, a dragon slayer. The guards of Manticore Castle, the base of the Drakkenberg, say Ingotfist has been up there since the Great Worm was last seen, and hasn't come down since. If the guards are to be believed, she's found untold riches up there that she can't use, being a slayer and all. They have vows, see. However, if you take Ingotfist a cask of Bugman's finest beer, it is said that she'll spill any secret when deep in her cups. All you need to do is find her. And there you have it. A very, very simple setup. While the stat blocks that I use will only be useful in 4th edition, there's nothing to stop you taking this story and running it in whatever world, especially one that focuses on dark fantasy. But where does this story begin? First off, we're going to need a little bit of background. Thogna Ingotfist is a dragon slayer, which of course begs the question. Slayers are dwarves who have taken on an oath. They have, at some point in the past, believed that they have betrayed themselves, they betrayed members of their family or their clan, and in doing so, they need to seek to right a wrong. They do this by making a very, very arduous journey, the details of which I won't go into here, but once they've done that, they ceremonially shave their head, save for a mohawk, which they dye bright orange, and carve their name into a pillar of other slayers, the physical manifestation of them taking that oath. That oath now means that they've sworn to die an honourable death in battle fighting a worthy opponent. Most slayers don't make it that far. They die within the first 1 or 2 encounters that they will come across, but there are those that go on to take on a further title, Demon Slayer, or, in the example of Thogna, a Dragon Slayer. One of the most famous examples being Gotrek, a slayer who is the protagonist of many a novel set within the Warhammer world, and the sworn enemy of the Skaven Grey Seer Thanquol. The module itself mentions the dragon Kalader. Kalader is a famed dragon of legend, but hasn't been seen for generations, and at least 100 years. Whether or not this is Kalader within the story is very much up to you as a GM, and something that I have deliberately left very ambiguous. And lastly, an original character. This is somebody who I have included as an original character for this module, but that's not to say you can't replace it with a recurring antagonist or enemy that your players may have. To put it plainly, Sabine is a necromancer, a role traditionally seen as being evil, but given her political alignment and morals, she's a slightly more ambiguous and morally grey character. This leads us on to the next aspect of this story, involving the party. Warhammer itself as a system focuses on normal people, villagers, town guards, merchants and traders, even beggars can be player characters. They are not the heroes of legends and lore that go off on impossible adventures that go down in history. They're normal people. And why would normal people ever go to such a dangerous location? Well, let's look at some options. If you happen to have a Dwarven Slayer in your group, what better way than to make their name fighting a dragon, to go down fighting a worthy adversary? But what if you don't have a Dwarven Slayer? Traders, merchants and peddlers may be looking for that untold wealth, something that they can then profit from. While those of religious backgrounds, especially those who are sworn into service of Mor, the god of the dead, who earnestly believe in the portents in dreams, perhaps you could give that player a dream where they see strange imagery, ravens circling the mountain itself. Perhaps your characters are on the run from the law, and with the promise of untold riches, they could carve out a new life, buy themselves new identities, and start again wherever they choose. And for those witch hunters and bounty hunters, you could bring in Sabine Yeager, a name that's circulated in those circles that no one has ever been able to bring in. Will your players be the ones to bring her to justice? And so from there, the adventure begins. At Manticore Castle, which itself sits at the base of the Drakkenberg, maybe provide them with a couple of stores, a quartermaster's office, an armoury, a blacksmith, somewhere that they can buy some kit or some armour that might be useful on the journey. And from there, the adventure begins to ascend the Drakkenberg. Now, the first signs that I'm including within this story that something is very, very wrong is that of a desolated camp. To give some background here, we're going to need to go to the town of Ubersreich. Ubersreich itself is in a state of upheaval. The previous Graf, von Jungfreud, has been deposed. With that, 5 families vie for control in the political vacuum that has been left behind. While the imperial military makes its presence very much known, the 5 families themselves, and without going into too much detail, are House Brunner, House Karstadt, House Holzenauer, House Sappentheim, and House Aschaffensburg. Each of these 5 houses has their own claim, but what of the previous deposed Graf? Well, he's rallying loyalists, and it will be the players that encounter one of these encampments. But something has happened here. Bodies are strewn about, tents have been ripped apart, and the sole survivor shows signs of a severe malaise. His body riddled with pustules, he coughs up blood when he attempts to speak, and his eyes weep pus. He can only say a few words before he meets a grisly demise and dies within the player's arms, but he calls this the worm rot, and talks of a woman dressed in grey and black. The first hints that Sabine has been this way. From here, you can begin to put in more dangers of the mountains as well. As mentioned previously, there are dragons, there are wyverns, there are basilisks, and there are manticores that all call this mountain home. And again, you can show those telltale signs of that disease. You can do weakened versions of these creatures, which are generally intended as boss monsters, which is enough to provide a threat to the party on the way, something that they can either attempt to sneak around, especially those characters that have the rover talent. It's a nice opportunity for them to be able to use that. These beasts, which show clear signs of this malaise again, the worm rot, are in a weakened form. Maybe they're half blinded. Maybe they're unable to run from their nest. They can't even flee. And it gives you those potentials to discover a nest. Perhaps their young have all died from the worm rot as it's spreading throughout the mountain as this virulent plague. And of course, there's the further dangers of the mountains. The exposure. Taking too long on the mountain will begin to incur those penalties. Have your characters roll for endurance as they climb ever higher, as the air gets colder, as snow begins to cap the peaks, as the air gets thinner. Make this mountain hostile. There's a reason that people don't come here. But you can also set this against a ticking clock. If the players take too long to ascend, then maybe have it so that Thognar cannot be found. What fate she met will be eventually revealed in the final act. But if they're quick, if they're expedient, and if they manage to make that climb, they find themselves looking a cave from within. You can see that faint glow of a fire. Perhaps they go in and for bringing a cask of Bugman's ale, they find somebody who's not really interested, somebody who's determined and stoic, staring into the flames. There's a determination within her soul. And perhaps the reason for her undertaking that oath can be revealed in that final conflict as well. Now, your players will probably want some interaction with Thognar. I would suggest to play her as slightly cagey, slightly reserved in what she tells them. This is a character with an oath to fulfill, and one that she takes incredibly seriously. She might even try to dissuade the players from going any further, telling them to turn back, go back to Manticore Castle, This is not their task. This is not their calling. But then again, on the alternative, you might have somebody who's very accepting and almost welcoming, especially if you have a servant of more in the group. Somebody that can see her body returned for the appropriate dwarven rites. Again, referring back to those bounty hunters and those witch hunters, if their target is Sabine, you could have it so Thognar agrees that they can come along, just provided they stay out of the way. And one thing to make really clear is that this is her oath, and she intends to see it through to the end. Now, your characters here have a chance to rest up a little bit, possibly recover some hit points, get a little bit of rest, although, of course, resting on a mountain, there is still that threat of exposure, although you do have the cave and you do have the fire, so maybe you can negate some of the penalties there. But to anyone that's unprepared, they're going to find themselves in a very, very dire situation. This is ultimately going to be a very, very difficult combat, with Sabine having resurrected a dragon. I realise that the undead dragon has been done to death, but there's nothing for it in the Warhammer system. So this is a chance to bring in something new, something that even your players that have maybe read the monster stat blocks and know what's coming can still hopefully be surprised by what you can pull out. Now, Sabine herself is actually the primary weakness. If she dies, this dragon will fall apart, crumbling back into bone and ash. You can describe this horrific creature, something that is held together by the dark magics, but itself appears as bone and sinew and muscle. Those once infernal blazing eyes are now milky and clouded. And from its chest cavity billows this noxious green fog. This creature no longer breathes fire, instead now spreading the worm rot. Sabine herself sits atop the dragon, and it will go out of its way to defend her. This is because it's completely under her control. But let's roll back and let's see what Sabine's motivations are in all of this. If the players do manage to engage Sabine in conversation before all of this begins and comes to a head, perhaps they'll actually begin to understand where she's coming from. She sees the problems that are emerging in Ubersreich, with no one ruling over the city and with 5 families all embroiled in petty squabbles. Perhaps she sees the benefits of bringing back von Jungfreud. Perhaps she stands against the Imperials. Perhaps your characters have similar views to her. And what she's done by resurrecting this long-dead dragon is creating a new threat, something that she can unleash on Ubersreich. She can throw the town into disarray, and in its weakened state, von Jungfreud can come back in and take control, declaring Ubersreich an independent town. Is that something that your characters will agree with? Or perhaps they've sided with one of the other contending factions? Another reason that Sabine is a major threat. Now, if this does come down to a combat with Sabine and her undead dragon, Sabine will start summoning in zombie hordes as well, those that have died in the mountains, and the reason for Thognar taking on the oath begins to become apparent. Now, you can either spell this out explicitly with Thognar explaining the situation, or you can use some of that interactive world-building storytelling by having loads of these zombies are evidently dwarves, those that have died fighting something. And if Sabine has brought back a dragon that was previously killed by Thognar, with this thing back in the world, Thognar's oath is no longer fulfilled. And now facing down are the members of her previous detachment, those that joined her to fight this thing in the first place. Those that lost their lives are now being called back to fight against her and you as a group. And if your players took too long, perhaps they dawdled in the castle, perhaps they took too long on the mountain passes, perhaps they took too long climbing, perhaps they went round the long way, not bringing any pitons or ropes and unable to ascend, and they had to go around a really, really slow route and they never found Thognar. Perhaps you could have it that the first zombie that they see approaching drags this axe, and the body itself, while somewhat deteriorated, is clearly fresher than the others and drags this axe behind her. You can even give it the elite quality where you give it some extra skills with weaponry and fighting abilities. I like to always end up with a few different scenarios that players can find themselves in. You can add in those little details that might be pertinent to one character or another, but the small things can always be reflected in the overall ending of this adventure. To do broad brushstrokes, there's 4 ways that I can see this scenario ending. If your players run or your characters end up in the unwanted TPK, you could have it that your new characters are either part of a group of militia sent out to defend Ubersreich against this new threat, or they could be travellers passing by the Drakkenberg. Perhaps the group they're travelling with could be among the first casualties as this creature descends down from the mountain. Or perhaps they're some of the custodial staff at Manticore Castle, perhaps they're Fletchers, armourers. servants, whatever the case may be. But Manticore Castle itself is going to be one of the first places to fall. That also gives the option for your group to be backed up with some slightly more adept fighters. Perhaps they provide a front line that can weaken the dragon, and then it allows these players to move in for a final kill and move the story forward. If the characters manage to slay the dragon. Now, it will go above and beyond to defend Sabine. Should they be able to bring this thing down, Sabine is going to attempt to make good on her own escape, using those zombie hordes as cover. They will protect her as well. They are under her complete control. Whether or not your players are able to track her down, or if she becomes a recurring villain. But the issue emerges is if your players kill the dragon and Thognar is still alive, she will see that her oath has been taken away from her. She no longer has the ability to fulfill it, and with that she will turn on the characters. She has a couple of talents behind her that's going to make her a real threat. The first of which is Beat Blade, which allows her to remove advantage from the player characters. And the second of which is Champion, which allows her to deal out some damage even on her defensive rolls. Either way, she is going to go down fighting. And it might be that she meets her end at the hands of your players. Will they be the worthy adversaries that she is so greatly underestimated? Who knows? There's only one way to find out. If Thognar is the one to kill the dragon, Sabine is still going to attempt to escape, but your group may well now find themselves with a good potential ally, maybe even somebody that can step in as a reserve player character should the worst happen. And the same is true of the counter. Maybe the players did decide to side with Sabine. While her methods are questionable and her abilities will certainly draw the attention of the Empire and witch hunters, she is a formidable practitioner of magic, and again, someone that your player characters might come to consider an ally. Perhaps she might even be able to teach a character a few necromantic abilities if they have any kind of spellcasting ability and they're looking for one of those dark laws to practice. You could also have her come along as a teacher of sorts, someone that can teach non-magical characters the language of magic. Or those that are looking to take a particular channeling skill, she does know Shaiish, the Wind of Death magic. But siding with Sabine will bring Thognar's attention to them. Perhaps somebody again that you can include as a recurring enemy. But that's just a few ideas, things that you can play around with in your game. But I want to know your thoughts. Let me know what you think. What ideas do you like? What do you not like? What ideas of yours are so good that I can rip them off and pass them off as my own? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're looking to run this for yourself, for your own game of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, you'll find some links in the description that will take you to some PDFs which contain the complete stat blocks as well as the rules for Wormrot and some tokens that you can use if you're playing on a VTT. But please do let me know what you think of this content. What do you think of these little scenario reviews? There's a whole book of them, so if the interest is there, I can always do more. And until next time, I leave you with the old adage, blood for the blood Gale Sigma.
Good save.
Thank you.